For 40 years, the Catholic Sun has been delivering news to the people of the Diocese of Phoenix. And with us today in the studio is Chris Gunty. He's the founder of the Catholic Sun. Chris, so good to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
We are holding here, I'm going to show it, the very first issue of the Catholic Sun, and you started this.
Yeah.
Tell us that story.
Well, I was a high school and college seminarian, and 3 years into the college seminary, I realized I was not called to be a priest. And I told that to my spiritual director, and he said, yeah, I've known that for 3 months. I've been waiting for you to figure it out. So I said, but I probably want a full-time ministry in the Catholic Church. I just don't know what, and seminarians tended to go into youth ministry and that. But that summer I interned at the Chicago Catholic, the newspaper for the Archdiocese. And I went back to him in August and said, I found it. This is what I'm going to do. So I actually got hired again after college by the Chicago Catholic. And as the editor and I talked, I said, my goal is to be the editor of a diocesan newspaper by the time I'm 35. So he helped train me, helped me get the business background that I would need to be an editor and a manager and to be able to do both of those things. And a short time later, 2 different people called me and said, the Diocese of Phoenix is looking for an editor. Are you interested in interviewing? We think you'd be great for it. So I did. I was 24 years old. So I hit my stride a little early. But one of the things was Bishop Tom O'Brien called and offered me the job, and it was the day before Thanksgiving, and it was too cold in Chicago for my car to start. But it was 72 in Phoenix. So I took the job. And so I got here in January, and we first sat down and met and started talking about things. And he said, can you do an issue by Easter? I said, sure, Bishop, absolutely, we can do that. Got upstairs, opened the calendar, looked at when Easter was, and found out it was like April 7th. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's early. We've got less than 2 months to get this done. And we did it. We came out on Holy Thursday. The day we went to press was April Fool's Day, but we came out on Holy Thursday with a great cover story of 330 new Catholics coming in via the right of election. And we've been telling those stories of faith then forever. I was here 19 years, and we just kept telling the stories of people's faith in the Valley and in the 3 colonies that we served.
Chris hired both myself and Joyce Coronel.
That's right.
Many years ago, more than 20 years ago.
Yeah. It was some great hires over the years. Rob DeFrancesco, who was editor for a long time and then communications director for the Archdiocese. I mean, we just always had a great team. It was never one person doing it. When we started, I thought, I sat down, kind of did a budget, looked at the kinds of things we needed to get done, and thought we could get by with a staff of 8, that might do it. And the bishop thought we could get by with 5, so we compromised, and I got 5. So that was, we eventually grew and then, shrunk back at other times, but we've always had great people on the team in writing, editing, sales, design and graphics, all of those things, because that's what makes it. It's always a team effort.
Tell us what it was like in some of those early days, putting out a paper. I mean, some people might not even know what that might even look like. I probably don't even know what that would look like in the early days of putting out a newspaper.
Well, this was in the days of no computers in the newsroom. I had a little Tandy 200 that had 8 lines on a screen that I could write stories and send them to a typewriter. They would print on a typewriter. I could also do my budget spreadsheet on that same computer. So wow, I had 2 different things I could do. But we did our own pay stub. But we didn't even have typesetting machines in the office. So we would take them to a type house on McDowell Road and drop them off overnight, drop the raw copy off overnight. On my way back into the office in the morning, I would pick up the copy, and then we would take exacto knives and wax, and we would paste them onto pages in the right design and all of that. And then we would take them out to the printing plant in Chandler. And because it's so hot here, we would take advantage of the walk-in cooler in the diocesan building to put the flats in until we were ready to drive them out, so things wouldn't shift with the wax. I mean, it was crazy. When we finally got the first computers in the newsroom, it was amazing. It was like, let's just get rid of all these other things, because it was not fun. You know, we would end up being, there was wax all over your pants by the end of the day, and people stepping all over each other. It was a mess.
What was the first big story you covered for the Catholic Sun?
The Pope. You know, we'd been in existence all of a few months when Bishop O'Brien got the news that Pope John Paul would be visiting. Nowadays, you don't get 18 months advance notice on a papal visit. It just doesn't kind of happen that way. But we did, and we found out that we were one of the cities on the trip. And so we ramped things up for that. We did all sorts of advanced coverage. What are the issues he's going to be talking about? Here he had the meeting with Native Americans and also with healthcare officials. So he visited St. Joe's Hospital. So we hired extra photographers, we hired extra reporters. We did all of those things. I had Margin Gisolian, the communications director, and I were kind of constantly in contact. We actually got somebody to loan us cell phones for the week because cell phones were brand new. We had walkie-talkies. But the idea was that we could be as close as we could to the Pope. So Margin and a couple of guys from Secret Service and Phoenix Police were always 20 minutes ahead of the Pope. I was in the van in the papal motorcade, and I had a pin that allowed me within 10 feet of the Pope, unlimited access within 10 feet of the Pope. So I could go wherever we needed to go and get that. So it was just those kinds of things that were amazing. But what was great was that when it came time to covering the Pope, and Joyce, you and I were talking about this before we started the recording, we had 4 different photographers, and they shot, I think, 100 rolls of film. And it was on slides because you could develop slides more quickly those days. But the scanning process for slides took a while because you had to scan them and then put them into 4-color separations. So I asked the photographers, I said, you need to pick your best 100 photos for me. And then we brought them all together, put them up on the light board, and I chose 92 photos that I wanted to use. And they're like, oh, did we do a good job for you? I go, no, I got more than I can need, more than I can use. I can't possibly have more. I said, now we got to figure out what the cover photo is. And one of the photographers looked at a picture of the Pope giving communion to a person who was disabled, because that was kind of one of the focuses of the Mass. And he said, that's the photo. He said, because of all the pomp, all the circumstance, he's a priest bringing Christ to the people. That's it. That's the message. And he said, there's your photo. It wasn't his photo. It was somebody else's photo. And so he was advocating for that simply because he knew that's the message we had to send. And so the headline was, we saw him as priest, pastor, and pope.
That's a beautiful story.
So many exciting stories through the years. Chris, and I can remember I would see you driving around town because you had a license plate that said Catholic Son. Like, you were Mr. Catholic Son. And, you know, just what a great debt of gratitude we have to you for all that you did, all the years that you served here. We also had another big story here when Mother Teresa visited, not too long after the Pope.
Not too long after the Pope.
You know, talk a little bit about that and what that was like. You basically covered 2 living saints.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm a third-class relic, I think.
Yes, you would be.
Because I'm shaking hands with both of them. Oh. It was phenomenal to be here when she was here. You get to see this humility and simplicity of both Mother and of the sisters who serve with her. They first got a house over near the Andre House of Hospitality, and immediately Mother said, well, the light fixtures have to go, the carpet has to go. We can't have any more than the poorest people we serve. So we have to, it has to be bare minimum. No furniture, no nothing. But she went around, she went to, visited the homeless shelter. We had a great big mass and a talk at the Coliseum, and it was wonderful to hear her speak and that. And we had a food drive as part of that. There was no charge to get in, but you had to bring canned food. It overflowed all the expectations because people were just giving and giving and giving. But there was one incident that came up in that, and the co-workers of Mother Teresa, the lay people who work with her order, one of them called Marge and said, Mother has run out of miraculous medals, because she would give out miraculous medals to everybody. And Marge said, well, what do you want me to do about that? And the coworker said, find some. So Marge turns to me and says, find some. So I called every religious goods store in town and finally found one that had some. And I said, well, how many do you have? And they said, we have 10,000. I said, I'll take them all. I'll be over in a little bit. And so I went and got them, brought them back. And she said, well, go bring them to Mother Teresa. So I did. And Mother said, have these been blessed? And I figured, no, because isn't Mother Teresa handing them out, blessing it up? And she said, no. I said, no, they haven't been blessed. She goes, well, take them back to the bishop, have them bless them, then I'll give them out. So that was how we took care of it. You know, it was just amazing to be there and be part of it. And then she went down to Tijuana for a couple of days to visit her sisters there. And in the meantime, the sisters who had been assigned here to Phoenix had been walking around the neighborhood and giving out sandwiches. And they found an empty convent, and they called Mother and said, we want this convent. So Mother came back and said to the bishop, we want this convent, can we have it? And he's like, yeah, I guess so. And that's how the house got established here. But it was an amazing time to cover those two living saints.
Who can say no to Mother Teresa after all?
Nobody at all. No, nobody can say no to Mother Teresa.
What are some of the other stories that stick out for you in your years that you served here? So many different reporters, a lot of changes in staff over the years, but what are some of the stories that you really remember?
There's the stories of parish spaghetti dinners and people who needed help, and all of those kinds of things they're just heartwarming, and they're ordinary people doing ordinary things. We did a series on divorced and Catholic and annulments. And a woman called and said that she'd been trying to encourage her daughter to start work on her annulment, and she'd just been dragging her feet, and it just was really hard for her. The daughter came over to pick Mom up they were going out for dinner or something like that, and Mom wasn't ready, so the Catholic son was sitting on the coffee table, as it does. And there was part 2 of the series, so the daughter picks it up and she reads it. Mom's still not ready. She says, Mom, do you have last week's copy? So she reads part 1. She started work on her annulment the following week. And those are the kinds of serendipity things that you never know when you're going to reach somebody with a story or a photo or a commentary. And it was just amazing to be a part of that, to be a conduit for some of that. We had a journalist in town who we asked to give us some training for the staff. And one of the questions she asked was, if you could interview anybody, who would you interview? And Nancy Wijek, who was our managing editor and photographer at that time, said she'd like to interview Mother Teresa. Well, a few months later, Mother Teresa comes to town. Nancy gets to interview her and take her picture. I said I wanted to interview a Holocaust survivor. Sure enough, within 12 months, I got to interview a Holocaust survivor. And not just a Holocaust survivor, but Franciszek Gajonicek, who was the man whose place Maximilian Kolbe took at Auschwitz. Goodness. So this is the man who Kolbe said, no, don't take this man. He has a wife and a family. I will die in his place. And he lived to tell that story. Years later, I was able to visit Auschwitz a couple of times, actually, and see the cell where Maximilian Kolbe died. But to know that I was connected to the man who was connected to him was just incredible.
What was it like to have that conversation?
It was translated from Polish because he spoke only Polish. And he was just still overwhelmed by this gift of faith that he just had no idea. This priest had no idea who he was, only that he was a husband and father and had a family. And he was just incredibly grateful for the chance to have lived his life throughout. And it just made an impact. And he just told that story to as many people as he could.
Wow. How has being in this line of work, and we'll talk about changes in Catholic journalism and changes in the evolution of your role, but how has doing this work for your entire career, how has that affected your faith?
There are times it's a struggle, because as you know, when we're this close to what's going on in the church, we see the good and the bad. But overwhelmingly, we see the good. We see the redemption, we see the stories of hope, and we're able to tell those stories of hope and redemption to other people. We're able to tell stories of people converting to the faith. We're able to tell stories of people who find that faith is just so much a part of their life. And, you know, it keeps me connected to the faith as well. I had brain surgery while I was working here. And at one point, fortunately, my parish had an anointing of the sick a week before my surgery. I was scared. I was deathly scared. I used my brain all the time for work, you know, and they're going to go in and dig in it. As the priests anointed those who were being anointed, and family members had their hands on my shoulders, and the whole community had their hands on everybody else, I felt the Holy Spirit cover me. And that was an incredible gift because I was part of this community of faith. And you don't get that. I get to tell that story. I get to tell other people's stories of faith, ways that we have affected their life, ways that being a part of the Eucharist has affected their life. And that's a tremendous grace. It's hard sometimes to do what we do because, you know, first we got to, the Pope died, and that's sad, and we're sad about that, and now we've got to go and do all the hard work, and then when it's over, it's like, okay, now we can pray for a new Pope. But it energizes us to do those kinds of things as we go along. And to me, it has always just been, how do we tell the next story? What's the next story we have to tell?
Well, you know, you've been a journalist a long time, and working here in the Southwest, how has, you know, part of the Southwest, and now you're on the other side of the country, how is this whole experience working here, how have you carried that forward into what you're doing now and the career that you have now?
Well, I think one of the things is that the people here I fell in love with Phoenix, and I fell in love with the Valley and the people of Arizona when I moved here from Chicago. It was just a great gift. And being able to find that kind of community was very helpful. I had to learn to adapt. So I came from the Archdiocese of Chicago, which was 1,100 square miles and 400 parishes. And I came here to 85 parishes in 44,000 square miles. So it was a lot bigger deal to go out to Kingman or Lake Havasu City and Flagstaff, cover stories. And I would make the drive up to Flagstaff and cover a story and come back that same day. It's like, that's a long trek. So there was that adaptation. But part of it was just, I learned how to work with people. The diocese itself was only 15 years old when I came. Bishop Tom O'Brien had only been bishop for 3 years. I was a young guy, with just a few years. So anything that went, I learned so much every day, every week, every year. And so when it's just the kinds of lessons that I learned as we went along, it was fun to say, we're not going to ever say we've always done it this way, because it was all brand new. And when I first caught myself saying, we've always done it this way, I asked the staff to smack me upside the head, because it's like, we're not supposed to think that way.
So do you have any stories you'd like to share about like what it was like getting the paper out? Did you ever miss a deadline, or did you ever have to like stop the presses? I mean,
we never had to stop the presses, but getting the paper out was tough because, again, we had this type house that we would take things to, and we would get back and you'd start laying out the headline and realize this headline doesn't fit. And the type house is closed and deadline is now. So we had, honest to God, press on type. So it was little type that you would rub off. And if you look at some of the early issues, things aren't always nicely, neatly lined up. There you can see, well, that's a little off. And I go back and I'm like, I can't believe we did that. But so there were those kinds of things. And when we got into it, the joy of putting things together, we actually got to the point where we were looking at we had an old computer system that was barely workable. It had a small screen, it did all of those things. And we had all the programming for it on one floppy drive, and we stored all the local stories on another, and then we captured stories from Catholic News Service on the other one. So we had that. So at one point, we were looking at getting a new system, and our Vicar General and the Vicar for Finance had to try to approve it. And Marge called me and said, it's time, Monsignor Moyer wants to come up and see what you know. I said, it's a terrible day. We're behind deadline. We're all stepping on each other. And she said, no, it'd be good for him to, this is the perfect time. I said, it's really a terrible time. She said, he's coming up. So he came up, and I started showing him what we were doing and where we do the paste up and where we do the this and that. And I said, and so this is the control system. And I said, this is where we store the programs and the news service. And that's a 500 megabyte floppy drive. And down here is where we store the local stories for this week. And we'll swap that out next week with news stories. And he goes, and where's the hard drive? I said, we have a 500 megabyte floppy drive for the programs and the news service, and a 500 megabyte floppy for the stories. He goes, but where's the hard drive? I said, there is no hard drive. He goes, you're getting a new system.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. As you look back over your career when you were here with the Diocese of Phoenix, is there a person that you interviewed? Just like sometimes we think it's just the ordinary people that we meet. Is there someone like that that stays with you, or a story that you told that you just brought a lesson from that to your life?
One of the interesting things happened, there was a woman named Ann Gillian who was an actress and singer and things like that. And she was going to be coming to town to do a show. And she had breast cancer, was a breast cancer survivor, and so was going to be talking about that and how her faith helped her through that. It had taken a long time to set up the phone interview to do in advance. Our old Catholic center was notorious for being bad about power system and going out and things like that. Halfway through the interview, the power went out. I was in the dark, could not interrupt the phone call, and my notes were terrible, but I finished the rest of the call in the dark, and then finally got off the call and marched down the hall muttering, I hate this building, I hate this building, flipped the circuit breaker and went back and tried to write the story. But it was just the kind of thing, it's what we did to get things done.
And that was challenging back in the day. I worked in downtown Phoenix in those years, and I can remember when where we're recording this was a playground with a Catholic school, and then we got this beautiful new building. What was that like, being in the brand new building here and seeing that whole transition?
It was amazing to do that. In fact, I got a sledgehammer and took a crack at the old building while they were knocking it down, because I really was not a fan of it. But you know, I was up on the roof of St. Mary's Basilica to take pictures of the dedication ceremony in the Central Plaza as we dedicated the building. And it was just to see that evolution was just wonderful. I mean, I think about the fact that when I got here, we had the worst typewriter in the building, because in the gap between Alive magazine and me arriving, anybody who had a typewriter that stopped working, they would swap it out with the one in our office. So by the time I got there, we had the worst. Eventually we got computers, then we got another computer. Now I'm sitting in a TV studio that's you know, the Catholic Sun. I mean, this is amazing. I would never have imagined this.
Right?
Well, and that's a good segue to my next question, and that is that, I mean, the entire media landscape has changed since you started this paper 40 years ago, and you have been really an early adopter of a lot of that. You've been on the cutting edge, and as your career has grown over the years. And can you talk a little bit about the evolution of this business and the evolution of your career personally?
Yeah. The business has changed in the fact that we now are more immediate. So I now work for the Catholic Review in Baltimore. We were a weekly newspaper when I got there. Then we switched to, after strategic plan, switched to biweekly. I eventually switched to a monthly magazine. So in print, we're less immediate, but we're much more immediate because we're fresh news every day on the web, social media, all of those things. And it's, how would you have imagined that 40 years ago? I just figured all I need is a pen and paper and a camera, and I can do my job. Now we do a radio show, so I brought with me here to Phoenix. I've got my radio recorder and a couple of headsets. I just did an interview with a movie director. Those are things I just wouldn't have imagined in that. And I went from here to Florida to run 6 Catholic newspapers there. All of the dioceses of Florida, except for the Diocese of St. Augustine, were part of the Florida Catholic. I did that for 6 years, and then I moved up to Baltimore to become the associate publisher and editor of Catholic Review Media. And you know, we have a lot of different things now. And I think that's the evolution of the media, is that we've had to realize that we have to reach people whatever way we can. And Pope John Paul told us this in 1987 when he visited LA after he left Phoenix, after we let him go. But he said we have to use all the means of communications that are available to us today to tell the word, to spread the word. And we did that. And those means of communication have changed over the years, but it's also been the kind of thing that we just have adapted to. Sometimes the church has been slow to adapt to it. I think now we're getting a little bit better about it, but we're still a little behind the curve on some things. And yet, as I said, I'm sitting in this beautiful TV studio, and it's a great gift. So
Yeah. Well, you said earlier that you said if I ever say, we've always done it this way, smack me.
Yeah.
And I will say that, like, I've watched your career. You're the person I go to when I want to learn about, what's the best program, what's the this, that. I mean, you have really been a person who's pushing yourself, pushing the industry, like pushing forward to bring Catholic communications to the same level as secular communications in terms of like technology and cutting edge. And also, I owe my career to you.
Good hires. They made some really great hires.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Now, what's funny is the story of when I applied for my job at the Catholic Sun from a classified ad in the newspaper, and I came in for my interview, and there were people around a table, and obviously you were one of them, and we had an interview, and I thought it went great. And the funny thing is, I was like, I think I even said something like, "Oh, I think you go to St. Timothy's," and you're like, "Yeah, I sing," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I go to St. Timothy's too." And between the time I had my interview, then there was Sunday, and I was lectoring because I've been a lector for a long time, and you were singing, and I'm like, "Well, this is cool."
Yeah.
And like 2 days later, I think I got the job offer.
Yeah.
But you
It's because you did such a good job as a lector. That clinched
you
it.
talk about like serendipity and the way that the Lord just kind of leaves these little crumbs for us along the way. And it's like that to me was like, oh, I think this is really cool. Maybe I'll get this job.
Yeah, and it's amazing how those coincidences just work into our lives. And God has a plan for us, which we don't always know, and we're not always sure of it. But I think He's brought me, my training in seminary gave me the background to be a good Catholic journalist. My dad was a math teacher. I got training in managing the business side. Those all gave me that kind of skill set. So it's unique in a way that I'm able to do both the business and news side. And that coincidence just it works very well for everybody.
Yeah, it sure does. Well, Joyce and I are so grateful that you have been a leader for Catholics, a leader in our industry. We've just spent some time together as journalists and as communicators, learning from each other, and you're always somebody that I learn from, and I definitely appreciate all that you've given to me personally, but then also to all of us collectively who do this work together. And so thank you for starting this legacy.
And thank you to Bishop John Dolan for bringing the Catholic Sun back.
Yes, we are so grateful. Our arc for the Catholic Sun has been very similar to the one that you've had with your publication. And so, yeah, it's the same, and it's the way that things are going. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for having this conversation. Joyce, it's been a pleasure as always. And thank you all for joining us today.
The Catholic Church confidently proclaims that God has created each person for eternal life. At the moment of death, life is changed, not ended, as an eternal dwelling is made ready for us in heaven. When that time comes to move from this life to the next, Catholic cemeteries and funeral homes will be there to serve and comfort you and your family. As a not-for-profit ministry of the Catholic Church, we're an extension of your faith community.